3 weeks before CEO, a small controller company gets a letter. Stop selling your product, destroy what you've already built, and don't show up to the biggest tournament of the year. Not because the controller is dangerous, because someone claims they own the idea of moving without a lever. This is the fighting game controller Cold War. And the wild part is, most people who play games for fun will never hear about this. It happened in the quiet part of the industry, the part where the money is real, the audience is small, and the fighting is vicious because everyone knows everyone. It's also the part where one simple question turns into a legal war. Who owns the leverless controller? Not the concept of buttons, not the idea of comfort, the actual layout people use. The one you see on stages, at majors, in pro backpacks, on stream, in sponsor photos, the shape of the thing. One company says it's theirs, another company says, prove it. And while they're fighting, the world keeps moving. Tournament rules change, big brands crash the party, console security walls get higher, and the FGC, this lovable gremlin of a community, has to deal with something it hates: paperwork. This is the story of how a niche controller design turned into a cold war, where nobody gets fully conquered, but everybody learns who has leverage. If you don't play fighting games, controllers, they just seem like accessories, optional, personal preference, like choosing a headset. In fighting games, the controller is half of your body. That's how we end up here, with a real industry problem. If a controller layout becomes the standard way serious players compete, whoever owns the rights to that layout holds a weapon. The FGC grew out of arcades. Now, that culture didn't just shape gameplay, it shapes hardware. Big joysticks, big buttons, layouts made for cabinet, for standing play, for quick repairs. The joystick became part of the identity. People didn't just play on sticks, they became stick players. Then consoles took over. Home setups replaced cabinets. Tournaments moved into hotel ballrooms and convention centers. At the same time, another reality existed: keyboards. On PC, players had been using keys for movement forever. Keys don't travel like a joystick, they're either pressed or not. That creates an obvious temptation. Now, if buttons are binary and fighting game inputs are directional commands, why are we moving a lever through physical space? The joystick feels romantic until you realize it's also a mechanical delay. So leverless was inevitable. The only real mystery was timing. Who popularizes it? Who brands it? Who gets credit? Who gets paid? And who gets to tell everyone, stop? Hitbox didn't just sell a new controller style. Hitbox pursued patents around an ergonomically correct game controller design, an all-button setup arranged to match natural finger positions, replacing the joystick for directions. The core patents in the story include US Patent 10.022.623, 10.722.787, and lastly, US Patent 11.369.867. And the key thing is what these patents are used to claim. Not buttons exist, not controllers exist, but a specific arrangement and concept of an all-button ergonomic layout that becomes widely recognized as the hitbox style. Hitbox had patents, Hitbox had a brand, Hitbox had recognition. And as leverless became more accepted at majors, the stakes grew. Because the moment a controller became normal, it stops being a weird hobby project. It becomes a market, and markets trigger enforcement. Leverless didn't get accepted politely. At first, it got a massive side eye, accused of being unfair, called a cheater controller. Players argued about whether it made execution too easy. Then top players started adopting it. That completely changed everything. Once leverless showed up consistently on the big stages, the conversation shifted from Is it legit? To how do we regulate it? And Leverless created a specific problems that the organizers couldn't ignore: SOCD. SOCD stands for simultaneous opposite cardinal directions. In normal human joystick world, you can't physically press left and right at the same time on a stick. On an all button controller, you can press the left and the right button together. You can press up and down together, so the controller has to decide what that means. That decision is called SOCD cleaning. For years, it was the Wild West. Different approaches existed. Evo's rules, built to manage this chaos, focused on one core principle: the controller can't send simultaneous opposite directions to the console. All of that sounds boring until you realize why it matters. SOCD behavior can create weird shortcuts in certain games. It can change how charge moves behave. It can affect movement options.
It was already necessary to remove the ability to hold left and right, because in games like Marvel 3, where mix-ups were such a large part of the strategy, holding both directions actually gave you a pseudo block button and a massive unfair advantage. In the last decade, we've discovered a similarly unfair, air quotes, advantage with the flash kick motion or charge moves that use down into up. The ability to press down into up in one frame and remove any travel time that a stick or a pad would normally have has been a big advantage to charge characters, and a big reason why a lot of people have switched to Leverless in the first place.
Big Daddy Capcom would step in hard with a global rule for its official tournaments. On March the 29th, 2023, Capcom Pro Tour announced a rule: if up and down are input at the same time, both must be maintained or both rejected. Meaning neutral. Same for left or right. And they didn't hide what they were targeting. Tactics like Guile's crouch flash kick behavior tied to older SOCD standards, where certain inputs could let you keep down while also getting an up input. The new rule wipes that out because down plus up becomes nothing. Again, this matters for our story because it shows something bigger than one lawsuit. The entire Leverless space was becoming regulated from two angles at once. One, patents and licensing, who can sell the layout. Number two, tournament rules. What's the layout is actually allowed to do. That's the pressure cooker. Now drop a fast growing competitor into it and let's see what happens. Junk Food Custom Arcades, aka JFCA, wasn't just another builder making boxes. They pushed the form factor: smaller, thinner, more travel friendly leverless controllers, stuff that fit modern tournament lifestyle, stuff that looked like it was the next step. They built real momentum, and momentum makes people nervous. By late 2021, JFCA had a presence lined up at CEO 2021. This wasn't just some tiny local. CEO is a major event on the calendar, getting booth space, sponsorship positioning, community attention. This is where brands come to get seen. And 3 weeks before that event, the letter shows up. On November the 9th, 2021, Hitbox's counsel, Dickinson Wright PLLC, sent JFCA a cease and desist letter. The letter alleged that JFCA's Snapbox line infringed Hitbox's patents, and it didn't ask politely. Hitbox demanded JFCA withdraw from CEO 2021 and cease sales of accused products, plus they had to destroy existing stock. JFCA pulled out of CEO 2021, describing it as a good faith effort to resolve the situation while maintaining its position that its products didn't infringe any valid IP rights. Now pause here. Think about what that means for a small business. Inventory isn't extra. Inventory is cash that you've already spent. Materials, labor, time, parts, shipping, delays, defects you already ate, margins you already planned around. Destroy it is not a suggestion. It's eat the loss and die quietly. That's why this isn't just community drama, it's existential. And that's why JFCA did the one thing that flips the table. They went to court first. On December 6, 2021, JFCA filed a complaint in the US District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. This move matters because it takes the fight out of the private threatening letters and forces it into a formal arena. Now Hitbox has to respond in court, not on vibes. Hitbox got an extension and on February 9, 2022 filed an answer and counterclaim accusing JFCA of patent infringement, focusing on at least the US patent 10.022.623 and alleging JFCA's Snackbox Micro and Snackbox V2 infringed. JFCA responded with defenses including validity arguments and prior art exhibits. Essentially, JFCA were arguing that Hitbox did not come up with this idea first. They made references to a 1982's Joysticks article and a 2009's Superman gamepad that was used to challenge the novelty. The case progressed through 2022, then on April 11, 2023, Judge Richard W. Story issued a claim construction order addressing 5 disputed terms. For 4 terms, the court largely adopted plain meaning, aligning with the patent owner's position, but one term mattered like a landmine: partially horizontally aligned. In simple terms, this entire point was a make or break moment in the legal fight between the two companies. The meeting, which was called a Markman Hearing, essentially has both sides meet with a judge to argue over the legal dictionary for the case. Now, this was a total disaster for Hitbox. The judge found this phrase was too confusing and meant different things in different parts of the patent, sometimes meaning left to right and other times top to bottom. Because the term was so poorly explained, the judge declared it invalid. And since that one phrase was used in all main parts of the patent, it acted like a landmine that blew up the entire patent, making it legally useless in this case. On that term, the court sided with JFCA and found it indefinite under 35 U.S.C. 112, meaning that the term lacked the required clarity to define the boundary of the claim. Let's be clear for a moment. That's not the same as Hitbox loses everything, right? And it's definitely not a Hollywood ending, but it is a crack in the armor, and a crack certainly changes the settlement math. Last but not least, a crack changes how confident you feel when you're sending those cease and desist letters to the next target. And while this legal math is happening, the industry doesn't just pause, it keeps moving. This is the part that most people forget about lawsuits. The market keeps living while you're stuck in court. So while this case drags on, other forces start reshaping the battlefield. By 2023, Leverless had become common enough that organizers needed standardized policies. Manufacturers had to respond, firmware updates, compliance modes. The controller space started behaving like software, not just hardware. Now, this is important because it shows a parallel truth. Even if you own a layout legally, tournament rules can still force design changes. The market isn't controlled by patents alone. It's controlled by the combination of legality and tournament acceptability. Let's add the next major twist. The giants walk in. Once Razer and Victrix enter the niche, that niche is no longer cute. Both released products with familiar Hitbox style 4-button directional layout targeting PlayStation 5 and PC. Both were officially licensed by Sony and PS5 compatibility, meaning they carried Sony approved security firmware and could function in the PlayStation 5 ecosystem legitimately. And here's the part that made people's heads explode. Neither Razer nor Victrix publicly announced any license from Hitbox. Razer's spokesperson asserted their Kitsune was wholly Razer developed without using competitor intellectual property. Victrix said it has its own patent portfolio and is aware of competitors' IP claims, implying confidence in its position. As of 2026, neither Razer nor Victrix was sued by Hitbox. This is the moment the Cold War becomes obvious. Boutique builders get a cease and desist and demand to destroy their inventory. Global hardware giant brands drop a leverless product into the market and keep walking around. Why? Because suing a giant is a completely different battle. A giant has lawyers on retainers. A giant can drag a case out until you forget what sunlight looks like. A giant can afford to fight even if it's wrong, just to exhaust you. That's why small companies are the easiest enforcement target. Not because they're guiltier, but because they're cheaper to pressure. That's ugly, that's real, and that's why people start calling this behavior bullying. Even if the legal rights exist on paper. Look at Hitbox's positions. They've got patents, they've got a competitor who took them to court, they've got giants entering without obvious participation. So what's the move next? Licensing. On April 11, 2024, Hitbox formally announced a licensing program for its intellectual property. The program invited other manufacturers to become licensees of Hitbox's patents and/or trademarks, and it introduced a Hitbox licensing logo, a seal positioned as quality assurance and products inspected and approved. Kind of like the Nintendo seal of approval, if you remember. Hitbox also emphasized publicly that it was voluntary. They stated they wouldn't require all makers to participate if they weren't interested, while reserving the right to enforce their rights where it made sense. Community reception was mixed to negative, with fears that the licensing program would be used to pressure smaller makers. As of the latest info, Hitbox's site lists 4 current licenses: Brook, Junk Food Custom Arcades, Paradise Arcade Shop, and S-Tier Gaming. Brook matters because they're not just a random brand, they're a major supplier of PCBs and adapters across the Fight Stick ecosystem. When a component layer company licenses, that's a strategic anchor. This is how a Cold War stabilizes, not by wiping enemies off the map, but by creating a system where some players choose to join the structure and others choose to stand outside of it. Now we get to the part that everyone asks about, the lawsuits ending. Here's the truth people hate. Most lawsuits don't end with a cinematic win like in the movies, TV shows. This one didn't end with a judge declaring the future of Leverless. The dispute concluded without a trial. The settlement terms weren't publicly disclosed. What we do know is the visible outcome. JFCA entered Hitbox's licensing program as part of the resolution. On July 28, 2025, Hitbox and JFCA jointly announced a licensing agreement under which JFCA became an official licensee, allowing them to continue selling Snapbox controllers under license. And because it settled, there was no final court ruling that fully adjudicated the patent's validity. The patents remained intact and unadjudicated, but let's not forget, players feel this stuff indirectly. Builders feel it directly. Boutique makers live and die on margins, reputation, and community trust. A legal threat can freeze customers, scare suppliers, and force changes in product plans overnight. Offshore Chinese companies like Harte42, who can ship low-cost products at scale, make enforcement even harder just by existing somewhere complicated. Once patents and licensing become the dominant conversation, hobbyists start wondering if they're building in someone else's fenced yard. Consumers also get a weird outcome. More options, but also a bit more confusion. You're not just buying buttons anymore, you're buying into a legal and tournament compliance environment that you actually didn't really ask for. And tournaments, they get stuck playing referee between corporate risk and competitive fairness. That's why this story matters beyond drama. It reshapes the entire Leverless ecosystem incentives. People love the word monopoly because it turns a messy situation into a simple villain. But the facts in the research point to something much more specific. Hitbox has patents and created a licensing system. Hitbox has selectively enforced, most notably against a boutique competitor, which ended in licensing. At the same time, major manufacturers launched leverless programs without publicly joining the licensing program. That pattern looks less like a total monopoly control and more like a two-tier market. On one side, you have the smaller players who often choose licensing because they can't afford protracted legal war. On the other side, you have large players that can take a different posture because they can afford to fight, settle, or ignore until they're challenged. That's not one company owns everything. It's one company has a weapon and everybody decides how much they're willing to risk. That right there is Cold War logic. Not total domination, just mutual pressure. The leverless controller stopped being a niche gadget and became a regulated infrastructure. Once that happens, the scene doesn't go back to the innocent era where everybody's building in their own garage and selling to their friends. It becomes an industry with IP, with licensing, with corporate entrance, with tournament governance, with platform security. A Cold War. No final battle, no decisive winner, just a new world where everybody has to choose a side, or at least choose a strategy. And the most hilarious part of all of this is, players still just want to hit their combos without their wrists exploding. That's all of this was built on. The human hand. The hand is the reason the leverless exists. The hand is the reason tournaments got involved. The hand is the reason patents became valuable. And the hand is the reason the next war won't be about plastic, it will be about the rules.